Good evening from Washington, D.C. This is C-SPAN. The leading Democratic presidential candidates are gathered in Chicago at this hour to share their views concerning Election 92 campaign issues. The following presidential forum is sponsored tonight by WLS Television, the Chicago Sun-Times newspaper, and the Democratic Party of Illinois. Voters in Illinois and in Michigan will go to the polls on Tuesday to take part in presidential primaries. In both states, unemployment is higher than the national average. It's 8.5% in Michigan, 9% in Illinois. The economy has become a major campaign issue throughout the region. In the 1988 presidential elections, Michigan and Illinois overall went for President Bush. 8 out of every 10 people in each state are white. About 15% are black. Here are the stakes for Tuesday. There are 164 pledged Democratic delegates up for grabs. In Illinois, there are 131 pledged Democratic delegates on the slate in Michigan. In the race for delegates so far this season, Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton leads. He has 707 pledged delegates. Governor Clinton is followed by former Massachusetts Senator Paul Tsongas, who now has 349 delegates, and former California Governor Jerry Brown, who has some 81 delegates. 300 Democratic Convention delegates declare themselves to be uncommitted. The presidential primaries on Tuesday are coming to you from Illinois and Michigan, and we will have special Election 92 coverage Tuesday night. From Chicago, we will simulcast the local news coverage from WBDM-TV, which is the CBS-owned and operated station in Chicago. Then from Michigan, you will see the returns as reported on Detroit's WDIV-TV, which is an NBC television affiliate. Our telecast will include interviews to analyze the results, and we will also open up the telephone lines to hear your reaction. C-SPAN's live Illinois and Michigan primary coverage begins Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. We take you now to Chicago for tonight's Democratic Presidential Forum.
Good evening, I'm John Drury. Welcome to tonight's presidential forum with Democratic candidates Jerry Brown, Bill Clinton, and Paul Tsongas. This evening's forum marks the last meeting between the candidates prior to the critical primary election Tuesday in Illinois and Michigan. As a result, this program is being broadcast simultaneously to voters in both states. Our format this evening also is unique. Questions will be posed to the candidates by a panel of reporters on a broad range of subjects. Once the question is directed, all 3 candidates will respond freely in an informal interchange of viewpoints and ideas. Each panelist will moderate the discussion on an issue of his or her choosing for 10 minutes. The discussion will then move to the next panelist and another issue. Our panelists this evening are Juan Andrade, Executive Director of the Midwest Northeast Voter Registration Project, Lynn Sweets, political writer of the Chicago Sun-Times, Hugh Hill, political editor of WLS-TV, Cheryl Corley, news director of WBEZ National Public Radio, and Bill Bonds, WXYZ-TV news anchor. We'll begin our discussion with an area that has received little attention from the candidates in this campaign, foreign policy. And our first panelist will be Juan Andrade. Mr. Brown, it's your turn to respond first to the question. Juan?
Thank you. Gentlemen, I hope that we can briefly touch on 3 parts of the world. Beginning with Governor Brown. Governor Brown, President Bush is going to try to make this campaign a celebration of our victory in the Persian Gulf, but with a defiant Saddam Hussein still a threat to the region. and now on a collision course with the United Nations. Did President Bush perhaps stop the war prematurely? And as Commander-in-Chief, how would you have stopped the war?
Well, he not only stopped it prematurely, he started it prematurely. For the last 10 years, as outlined so well in the New York Times today, Mr. Bush and his administration personally helped Mr. Saddam Hussein and Iraq arm themselves and make themselves a more powerful threat year after year. Then he decides he wants to go to war with them. Then he decides he wants to stop it. I mean, the whole thing is a mess. The full information is not out yet, and I believe we're no better off today than we were then. We're still importing $50 billion of oil. The Kuwaitis still won't let women vote. It is still a gap between the richer Arabs with the oil and the poorer Arabs without it. The Arab-Israeli question is still hot and burning, and we do not have a national energy policy, and we have millions of people who've been neglected, betrayed, and not treated as American citizens in our own country. I am here to say we want a foreign policy that encourages regional control of these disputes and not macho police activity by Mr. Bush or anyone else, because our challenge is right here in Chicago and across this country.
Thank you. Governor Clinton?
I believe we did end the war a little bit too soon. To be fair to the President, he promised our Arab allies, when they signed on to the UN position, that we would not invade Baghdad and depose Saddam Hussein or assassinate him. But General Schwarzkopf, by all reports, wanted to fight on for another day and a half or so, destroy 700 tanks, a substantial portion of the Republican Guard, and give the Iraqis a chance to throw Saddam Hussein out themselves. I think we should have done that. Then in the aftermath, I think it is appalling the way we let the Kurds and the Shiites twist and suffer after encouraging them to rise up. And it was only when our allies and the press stepped in that we did the decent thing by them. Now I think the issue is what happens now. I think we have to push for demilitarization, for democratization in the Middle East. I think it is going to be a very tough struggle all the way through to stop Iraq and Iran from becoming nuclear powers. And I think we have to do whatever it takes to see that the UN ceasefire is honored. And finally, I think we do have to liberate ourselves from our reliance on Middle Eastern oil with a new and different energy policy.
Thank you. Senator Tsongas?
Well, it's very clear that if Saddam Hussein is able to violate the UN resolutions to get away with it, there is no new world order, or at least not one we're going to be comfortable with. So the United States and our allies, we have no choice. Those resolutions have to be put in place and enforced, and his nuclear capability has to be taken out. Let me just say one thing about President Bush. He always talks about his experience. He has more experience than the Democratic candidates. But experience and wisdom are not the same thing. Case in point, what happened was when they went towards Baghdad, Saddam Hussein, who used to be Adolf Hitler, if you recall, all of a sudden became somebody they wanted to keep in power. Why? Because they were more worried about Islamic fundamentalism than they were about Saddam Hussein. So the notion of Iraq split into three parts, a Kurdish state, a Shiite state, and the existing state, was more of a threat to the Bush administration than Saddam Hussein. If that's experience, it may be, but it's not wisdom.
Thank you very much. Governor Brown, if I may ask you, Mexico is seeking a trade agreement with the United States in order to cope with inflation and massive unemployment, poverty, illiteracy, and a number of other socioeconomic problems. Arguably, we have our own problems here at home. But how can we internally debate and negotiate a mutually beneficial trade agreement without triggering a Mexico-bashing situation similar to the one we have now with affecting Japanese and Japanese Americans? And as president, what kind of a trade agreement would you support?
Well, first of all, I don't support the so-called fast-track authority that the Congress, Democratic majority, Mr. Clinton, as well as Mr. Tsongas all support, because it's a blank check depriving Congress itself of the authority to exercise its constitutional function to make law, to amend, to repeal, to suggest, to add, to subtract. That's the trouble now. We're on a fast track to move jobs to Mexico even faster than they're being moved today, which is too fast for my taste. I am very sympathetic to the people of Mexico, and I don't even want to see them disrupted by these plants expanding along the border that disrupt their own economy. They have to grow internally. We can trade, we can expand our relationships, but we must protect jobs here. 50,000 jobs have left Chicago in the last 10 years and gone to foreign countries. In Detroit and places in Michigan, it's devastating. Today in the New York Times, people talked about Mr. Apple, the pundit from Washington, a very fine man. He said the people in Detroit were being selfish because they wanted to keep jobs there. They're so out of touch in Washington. We must protect our jobs here. I'll negotiate a treaty with the country of Mexico, but I'm going to protect these jobs first, come up with an economic strategy to do that, and then, in that context of a mutual respect, common market, but nothing to undermine work here. And you know, it's so amazing to me when I see these unemployed people. They don't get it in Washington, and we've got to say no. And I'd say that's the #1 issue in Michigan today that separates me from these two gentlemen. The suffering of those people must be respected, and that free trade, fast-track treaty is like economic suicide for millions of people in this country.
Governor Clinton, what kind of a trade agreement would you support?
Well, first of all, to be fair to Senator Tsongas and myself, we haven't signed off on any agreement. The Fast Track Authority was devised by the Congress in the 70s to give Congress more input, not less input into trade. It used to be that the executive branch could just make whatever deal they wanted, and then the burden was on Congress to come in and try to undermine it piecemeal. It became very difficult. That's why a pro-American jobs person like the House Majority Leader Dick Gephardt supported the authority to negotiate. Now, let's look at what's happening between the United States and Mexico. The good news is trade is going up and the deficit's going down. I think Michigan, for example, is one of the top 3 or 4 states in exporting products to Mexico. The bad news is we're moving too many jobs down there. How do we get the best of both worlds? Negotiate agreement which requires Mexico to lift its labor standards and wages, lift its investment in environmental protection, so we cut the wage gap, and at the same time develop an American economic strategy, control health care costs, remove the incentives for moving jobs overseas that are now in the tax code, give incentives to reinvest in America, and organize a genuine American manufacturing strategy. That way you could get the best of both worlds and help both countries.
Senator Tsongas?
The fact is that the United States has to negotiate on environmental issues, on worker safety, those kinds of things. Then that comes back to the Congress for a vote. But let's step back for a moment. What is the U.S. economic battle plan? Do we have a strategy? The Japanese have one. The Germans have one. The Taiwanese have one. We don't have one. It's pretty obvious what's going on. The Europeans have gotten together. Europe, 1992. The European Common Market, and they're going to come to each other and help each other. Eventually, you're going to have a common market in the Pacific Rim. So where does that leave us? We have to have North America and South America brought together in a cohesive common market so we help each other and not get picked off the way it's happening at this point. Second part of the strategy is you have to grow U.S. capacity. The manufacturing base is the future of any country. We are losing our manufacturing base. So my economic plan is very simple. Put all your resources into building the manufacturing base, and certainly Michigan and Illinois are classic examples, like my home state of Massachusetts, of what happens when your manufacturing base is in trouble.
We have to move on now to the next.
But there was a misstatement here by Governor Clinton. He said that Congress will get more input under fast track. He must not understand it, because fast track means the president gets a blank check. They're down there right now negotiating in secret with business lobbyists who want to take jobs from here and put them down there. Congress gets no input. It comes back hundreds of pages, negotiated in secret. It's vote yes or no, up or down. It's the exact opposite as it was misrepresented by Governor Clinton.
I have a chance to rebut there. I didn't misrepresent it. They do have to vote it up or down, but now they get to vote before it takes effect. Before the fast track system was established about 15 years ago, Congress had no front-end input. These deals were made, and then they had to scramble around and decide whether they were going to go along or not, and if so, how to pick it apart. That is the difference.
Wait a minute.
We have to move on now to Lynn Sweet, who is most anxious
Only the Congress can sign the treaty. Only the Senate can ratify a treaty under the Constitution of the United States. The President has no authority to make a treaty. And as a fellow Yale law graduate,
we're going to stick with this format and move on to Lynn Sweet, who is anxious to ask some other questions. Your first questions will go, of course, to Governor Clinton, and you'll have 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Governor Clinton, Americans have heard a lot in the whole campaign about what you plan to do with their taxes. Tax deductions you took, however, have been the subject of stories this week, as well as the role of Mrs. Clinton, a lawyer, in dealing with the state agency on behalf of a savings and loan, one whose owner was a business partner of yours. These questions suggest that at the least, you were not sensitive to the potential or the perception of conflict of interest. Where do you draw the line?
Well, I disagree with that. First of all, I did not go into business with someone who was in a state S&L. I went into business with someone who was in the real estate business. I invested my money, and I lost money.
No, at the time, and let's not be sidetracked by whether or not you won or lost money. That's not the issue.
The issue is, did I go into business with somebody in the S&L business? The answer to that is no. The person later got in the S&L business. Now, let's deal with the other issue. During the whole time I've been governor, my wife, who is in the oldest law firm west of the Mississippi, is a highly regarded lawyer, has never lobbied me or any state agency that I'm aware of, has never accepted any partnership share of funds for the work that her firm does with the state, and has instead given a great deal of time to public service. The questions you ask about what she did are being basically researched and will be resolved in public shortly by her law firm. Would I go into business with anybody that was going to do business with the federal government? Absolutely not. Listen, I have been reviewed.
Well, I guess I'm not asking you, and I will get to that, what we'll do if and when you're president, but I'm asking you to tell us a little bit. I also understand that it's a contemporary problem for many two-career couples to figure out how to make it work. What I'm asking you is, where do you draw the line now, even as governor? And then we can move on to what would happen if you were president.
Where do I draw the line about what my wife should do?
No, about what you do and how you handle it specifically in the situations that came up.
The situation that came up was I entered into a business investment with someone who was in the private sector. We put up equal money, we put up equal risk, we lost money. Later on, he got into the S&L business and I was governor. At that time, because the business was losing money, I couldn't get out of it. If I let somebody buy me out, that would be a real scandal.
Okay, Senator Tsongas, you have come into Illinois this week, and you've tried to make an issue and to try and exploit the savings and loan deal on Governor Clinton. On one hand, you're very sweet sometime, and you're this Elmer Fudd. You have these commercials here that have just a higher octane senator here. What's the real Paul Tsongas?
Well, you're talking to him. The fact is, I began this campaign a long time ago, a year ago. And what got me into this race was the economic decline of this country. I mean, I'm the least probable, maybe Jerry, you come close to, candidate. I mean, we weren't supposed to be here, the two of you, the two of us. The fact is, I'm motivated, not by ambition, but there's a purpose to this. I mean, Massachusetts, Lowell, Massachusetts, where I grew up, and Flint, where I was the other day, Chicago, this is what motivates me. Now, the campaign has become contentious. I agree with you. And I've tried to have a pledge where I'll say no more ads, everything is going to be positive, talk about what we stand for. That has not happened.
But part of it is
I don't like that any more than anybody else does.
Okay, is it not because of the way that you've conducted the campaign too? It's not like you're an innocent bystander, is it?
We are participants. Fact is, the first time that my name was used, candidates who are not here now, was back during the New Hampshire primary. And we tried and tried and tried not to do that. But eventually you get to the point where if you don't respond, then there's a judgment made about you. And I'm not willing to let that judgment stand.
Now, Governor Brown, you seem like you have come in and you have been able to, I think, do a number in a sense in talking about this semi-flat 13% tax rate that you have. If it doesn't yield the money it takes to run government, which deduction or loophole would you close? For rent, for mortgage, or for charity?
None of them. I think it'll yield a lot more. I think we can probably collect the revenue on less than 13%. On less than 13%. And contrary to a very misleading ad that Mr. Clinton is now running in Michigan to try to discredit the program, our tax program will encourage exports by relieving exporters of taxes, and they'll put the 13% tax on the imports. It is not a sales tax. It's a tax on business. And since 1950 to the present, business has been escaping its taxes. They used to pay 50%, and people used to pay 50. Now people in Social Security and personal taxes, we pay 80, business pays 20. This rights that balance, and it taxes the business, just like we do today, 35%, but it broadens the base, and it makes it so there'll be long-term saving.
Do you foresee the possibility, Governor Brown, if your plan does not yield the revenue that
it's going to yield more.
But if it doesn't, the corporations would pay, that you would, and if you had to raise it, you would raise it on corporations rather than individuals?
No, that's the beauty of this tax. Unlike the one we have now that has 4,000 pages, about as tall as this podium, and none of those pages are for you and me, they're for people with high-priced lawyers that buy those loopholes. The beauty of the 13% is that you find out how much revenue you want, you set the number. And then we know if it goes up to 14, we know what happened. Whatever the revenue that we want to get,
Governor
you just
Clinton
mark
wants
the
to jump
number
in here. Go
and
ahead.
you get it.
Well, Governor
Glenn,
Clinton.
it is not my characterization of Governor Brown's plan. It is a characterization of the Citizens for Tax Justice.
Who's
It is
that's
a
the
tax reform
organization,
group in
by the way,
Washington, D.C.
who was run by your campaign manager.
That's right. I got him in here because I was for tax fairness.
Right, well, just so when people
That's
know
right.
that when you mention
But
it, it
the
is an
Citizens for Tax
organization
Justice
that you have a
is funded
relationship
largely
to.
by labor unions, people who are interested in tax fairness.
Yes.
They say that if you have a 13% income tax and a 13% value-added tax, which is a national sales tax, no matter how Governor Brown tries to cut it, it will dramatically cut taxes on the richest people in this country, dramatically increase taxes on middle and lower middle income people, and produce $180 billion less than we're getting now. So you won't get enough money, and you'll make the tax code even more regressive. That's what they say,
Well,
not
I know.
me.
Speaking
You know
of the
what? Can I say something? I have a report from that same group, and it says that under Governor Clinton, the poorest 20% are having to pay 6.2 times as much in actual sales taxes as the richest 1%. There it is.
That's
it's right in the paper. How do you like that? I don't. Yeah.
And that's why we cut income taxes for 42% of our people last time, took 25% of the people in Arkansas, all the people he's talking about, out from under the income tax code. Most states in this country had to raise the sales tax in the 1980s. It was their only option.
Okay, let me
Meanwhile,
move on.
the federal government lowered taxes on the very people Governor Brown now wants to lower taxes on more.
Okay, Governor
the
Brown,
wealthiest
by
people.
the way, do you fill out your own income taxes? You talked a lot about the tax code. Do you do
I
the
used to
taxes
fill it
yourself?
out until
But
it
you
got
don't-
so darn complicated. In 1986, they
So you
thought they
don't?
were- I used to fill it out. Now I got to pay an accountant. I don't like it.
Okay, and Governor Clinton, we
I
know
want
that
to
you
make
use...
it so simple that you can fill it out on a postcard.
use
Okay,
an
you
account,
use
and that's what my
preparers.
plan
We
is.
know that from all these stories
I
about your
always have
tax
used an
problems.
account, yeah.
And Senator Tsongas, do you do your own tax returns?
No, I try to stay within the law.
You know, it wasn't too long ago that most Americans
We
could.
don't think he'd do it illegally. I think we should say that.
That's the whole point of the flat tax. Everyone can fill it out on a postcard. You find out what you earn, deduct rent and charity or your home mortgage, and you multiply by 13. It's simple, it's clean, and it cuts out all the corruption in Washington, which raises money by selling
Okay,
loopholes,
none
of which are for
Let me
us.
give a question that maybe each of you could bounce off of before we have to end this segment, because there is a lot of talk about these different tax plans. But for seniors, like my parents, who don't want to sell assets, they aren't concerned about middle-class cuts or capital gains. They rely on interest rates, which are very low right now. We know that. If either of you were president, at the end of your first year, would we have higher rates for people who are on fixed income or not? Why don't we take Senator Tsongas and then Brown and then Clinton?
I mean, higher rates for income.
No, not higher tax rates for people on fixed incomes who depend on their investments to give them their income. If you were president, would you have higher rates at the end of the first year or not?
Higher rates of people who are on fixed
No,
incomes.
higher rates of people who, higher interest rates on investments, money markets, for example.
Well, it'd be where it is now. I mean, what
Low.
we're... Excuse me?
It would be at the low rates.
You mean
it is
would we
now.
raise interest rates?
Yes, for money markets, certificates of deposits. Jerry Brown, would you like to try that?
Well, this is the first time I ever thought that lowering interest rates was bad. I can't believe anyone standing here that we're not all going to say we would like the lowest interest rates possible. I mean, that has to be what's good for business, what's good for the country. And it's true, if you're living off interest rates, you better start investing in something that can generate higher return. But if those rates are lower, then your cost of living should be a lot lower, too.
While
Let
we're
me answer the
discussing
question very
cost of
quickly.
living, let me... this is a brochure that Governor Clinton's people are handing out. And one of them says, supported freezing Social Security cost of living increases COLA. Bill Clinton, no. Tsongas, yes. Fact is that Governor Clinton voted to cut COLAs when he was a governor. We had a conversation the other day. We agreed. For people above $125,000, they're going to have to help start paying for Medicare. This
Hugh
kind
Hill,
of
you're going to have to
literature is
come
not
in here now. This
wait a minute.
10-minute period is over. Hugh Hill, political editor of WLS-TV. Your first question should be to Mr. Tsongas.
Yes, and it's about jobs, Senator. And in Chicago recently, we had a graphic example of how people who are out of work want to go to work. They lined up thousands of them for jobs in a hotel. Some of them got those jobs, but many, many more did not. How will you take care of these people who are laid off, fear of losing their homes, their cars, their health insurance, and everything? How would you do that now?
Well, the best two things you can do for the economy immediately, lower the interest rate. The Fed has done that. And secondly, the jobs program, highway construction, transportation, etc., that's ongoing. But the only way you create jobs is the same way everybody else does it, the hard way. you invest. One of the great differences between the candidates, I take all our resources, no middle-class tax cut, no tax credits for having children, take all those resources and pour it into the manufacturing base. MIT study 2 years ago said it very clearly. If you wish to live well, you must produce well. And the question in this campaign is whether we're going to say no to the easy things, the giveaways, and take all your resources and build the future. The manufacturing base is everything. If you lose the manufacturing base, there is no society, there is no economy, and that's where I pour my energies and my resources.
Governor Brown, would you have a massive public works project to put these people to work?
I would have a massive commitment by this country to eliminate within 15 years the $300 billion we spend each year unnecessarily for oil and electricity. We have a Pentagon budget of waste. These lights, the heating, the cooling, motors, all sorts of windows, buildings, retrofitting. We can employ millions of people, and we can start tomorrow with unskilled, semi-skilled, and highly skilled, and introducing technology of various levels of complexity into this economy, and we can pay for it by the savings that will be generated each day, accumulating after 15 years in an annual saving forever of $300 billion. That's how much conservation and efficiency is in this wasteful system. And my #1 goal for immediate jobs is to commit ourselves to this effort in every community in this nation. And that'll put people to work, and it'll just take them right off the street tomorrow.
Governor Clinton.
Well, nothing will take them all off the street tomorrow. I do think we need a short-term strategy, greater incentives in the housing industry. Some of those are before the Congress now. I would also take the taxes that the American people have already paid for the 6-year highway program and let all the contracts in 2 years. That would put another 250 or 300,000 people to work in this country while we build a longer-term investment. I agree we need significant incentives to invest in this country. I've proposed an investment tax credit that you only get if you invest in this country, a new business tax credit, and other changes in the tax laws to get people to invest. I agree that we need to focus on getting a manufacturing strategy. I am opposed to Senator Tsongas' proposal for a capital gains tax cut. That has nothing to do with the manufacturing base of this country anymore. Look at General Motors. You give a capital gains tax cut, you drive up the value of General Motors stock, they still lay the workers off here and continue to build a plant in Germany and one in Mexico. A capital gains cut no longer is tied to investment in American jobs. And I'm against across-the-board cuts for the wealthy that got 60% of the wealth for only 1% of the people in the 1980s. Let's give incentives to people, but only if they invest in our jobs, our people, and our future.
Gentlemen,
Could I have a rebuttal?
Yes, sir.
Fact is that in Japan, they understand the role of capital. Japan is half the size of the United States. They do more capital investment, more research and development. You know what the end game of that is? They blow us away. They blow us away. The fact is, when they lowered the capital gains tax in 1986, there was $4.2 billion of venture capital. So small companies grow, become great companies, hire people. Now it's 1.8. Less than half of the venture capital available, 86 available today, which means the regeneration of companies is simply not going on. That's the problem. In terms of a capital gains, Jack Kennedy, 1963, said it very well. The capital gains tax is how you funnel investment and how you change investment strategies. Jack Kennedy was not wrong in '63, and I'm not wrong today.
May I now interrupt and ask you a question about cities? Now, you know this program is being telecast in Chicago and Detroit, 2 cities that are hurt very badly. Mayor Daley and Mayor Coleman both are saying that the federal government is abandoning cities. I want to know what all 3 of you would do to help cities like these 2 we're talking about tonight. Senator Tsongas.
I live in the city. Lowell, Massachusetts, great manufacturing base, gone. So my childhood, my adolescence, and today I still live there. We lost a great deal, and a lot of people left, like Flint, Michigan, left the city. There's only one lesson, and that is the cities have to come back. 2 ways to do it. One, you have to provide basic services. Head Start would be a good example. Worker training, those kinds of things. Good education. But ultimately it comes back to the same old truth. You have to have people working. There has to be a manufacturing base to keep these cities going. No manufacturing base, no Michigan, no Illinois, no Massachusetts, no country. You have to get the private sector to invest. How do you do it? You go back to the UDAG program. Poorly administered, but a great idea. The enterprise zones. Give the private sector incentives to take their money and invest it in our cities. Only way you're going to bring them back.
Governor Brown.
Okay, first of all, I would acknowledge, as the president, that the threat is not 10,000 miles away. It's right here in Chicago. It's in Detroit. It's in Flint. It's in Los Angeles. This is the adversary. It's inequality. It's impoverishment. It's despair. Having cut the budget by 50% over 5 years, that's how long it'll take to work it down, we would take some of that money for revenue sharing. We'd take some of that money for this energy efficiency program that's going to start hiring people and then training them for the necessary work. We're going to go from B-2 bombers to B-2 bullet trains. I mean, you can't take a train today and go as fast as you could in 1925. It's a disgrace. Europe and Japan are ahead of us. We're going to catch up and pass them by. Finally, I'd start a civilian conservation corps, similar to what Roosevelt did back in the 30s. It put millions of people to work. People are still proud of what they were able to accomplish. We did it in California. 50,000 young people have already gone through it. It would not only be to protect the environment, but it would be to help the elderly. It would be a VISTA, Peace Corps, Conservation Corps effort.
We're running out of time on this segment,
and I would
Governor.
put as many as 500,000 to 700,000 young people in
and
it.
we have to have Governor Clinton reply.
For the gangs and the killing and the despair that we see.
I think I'm the only candidate that's actually released an urban policy. We have to focus on economics, on education, on family, on crime and drugs. I would establish nationwide a network of small business development banks for inner city neighborhoods like the South Shore Bank here in Chicago that's been so successful. I would give special incentives to people who would invest in our inner city areas. I would fully fund Head Start and establish more parent-based educational projects. I would reward working families by establishing an earned income tax credit that would take all the working poor above the poverty line if they're working 40 hours a week and supporting children. I would have an anti-crime, anti-drug initiative that would have drug treatment on demand and that would focus on things like the tenant management in the Chicago housing projects that Vince Lane put in, community policing, and community-based boot camps for young people who get in trouble. Before you send them to prison, try to let them perform community service work, give them treatment, give them education, try to reconnect them to our future. A people program and an economic program. That's what our cities need.
I only have about a minute left. Could I ask you about work welfare, people on welfare going to work?
Yes.
Could we start with all three and be brief, please? Senator Tsongas.
Well, obviously, if you can take people from welfare to work, we would all agree with that. But there better be some jobs. If you go to a mother on welfare and say, we're going to give you child care, we're going to train you, and you get out there and work, and there are no jobs, what are we doing? That's a false game.
Governor Clinton, we must go to you next.
In my state, we've been doing that, and our welfare rolls have grown at less than 1/3 the national average in the last 3 years. Education, training, child support, medical coverage for the kids, then require people to go to work. Opportunity first, then responsibility. Don't do what Bush and Quayle do and beat up on the welfare population. Before you require them to work, give them the chance to work and the tools they need to protect their children and to perform well in the marketplace.
Set up 50 enterprise zones in the worst areas of unemployment and welfare dependency. Give business a 10-year generous tax break for setting up any enterprise in that zone and hiring the people that live there that are out of work and are on welfare. Take the welfare check that the state now pays, turn it into a voucher, and turn it into the employer, and let the employer then add whatever he or she can to the salary, and you now have a welfare person getting paid by the employer and getting benefits on Medicaid and food stamps, and over a 5-year period, take away 20% of the public assistance till it's totally eliminated, and you have a worker in the private sector working and trained. Private enterprise zones in the 50 worst areas turn welfare check into welfare voucher.
Our next questioner is Cheryl Corley. She's the news director at WBEZ, National Public Radio. You have 10 minutes, and you should start with Mr. Brown.
Governor Brown, there's an old adage that tells us that owning a home is the American dream, but for an increasing number of Americans, even finding a room is kind of difficult. The number of homeless is growing at an alarming rate. Some even live in huts, and moderate income housing is often too much of a price to pay. In some cities like Chicago and Detroit, the housing stock has been depleted since the last decade, and SROs or single room occupancy hotels are just no place to be found. So with all of that, how do you propose giving the homeless and those who are just on the edge of being homeless some alternative to living on the streets?
Well, it's interesting. I spent an evening last week, I spent the night in a homeless shelter for women and children in Baltimore. And it's true. Women and their children are living in little broom closets. And across the street are empty apartments. there are more empty buildings than there are homeless people in this country. As president, I do everything I could to put the two together. Where the cities own it, I'd push to open those up and allow homeless people to go in and live there and move the two together. The biggest problem, of course, is if you don't have income, you can't sustain those shelters or those homes or apartments that you can give people. So the most important thing is the training and the income opportunity. And the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Enterprise Zone, the massive effort to reduce the inefficiency on our energy system would all be a source of the jobs and the income needed. And then, as Governor Clinton said, drug treatment on demand for those who have that kind of difficulty, and then restoring our mental health program so those who are homeless because of mental disability could also be taken care of.
Governor Clinton.
I would have a broad-based housing initiative focused on giving more incentives and funds to local government and to community nonprofits. I would focus on the homeless population by doing some of what's been suggested. Of all the houses that the HUD department is foreclosed on in the country, 10% of every one in every state, of all those, can be set aside right now to be given to churches and community nonprofits as homeless shelters. I would work out a partnership with state housing agency to move those out now to open them up for homeless shelters. I would be for tax credits for first-time home buyers, for raising the Farmers Home the Federal Housing Administration guarantee on a middle-class home price to make it easier for people to buy houses. Then I would support more partnerships, public-private partnerships like the Nehemiah Housing Project in Baltimore, or the Pilsen neighborhood projects here in Chicago, in a Hispanic neighborhood where I saw concrete construction leading to homes for low-income working people with 1/4 the normal energy bill, 1/10 the normal fire insurance bills. We have learned in the 80s how to do nearly something with nothing because of the Reagan-Bush cutbacks. Now we need to fund these grassroots initiatives and solve the problems with the ideas and the stock that are out there.
Senator Tsongas, I'd like to twist it just a little bit and still stick with the theme of homelessness. In Illinois, at the end of this month, thousands of single adults face the prospect of homelessness because general assistance, a welfare check that they receive of $254 a month, will come to an end. Our mayor here calls it a crisis. Thousands of people in Chicago and in the state are expected to be affected. Next year, transitional assistance, as it's called, will be cut to 6 months. In Michigan, I believe it was wiped out entirely. What do you do to help these people?
Well, let me say, I think it should be clear. These issues we're talking about existed sort of in the 70s. They exploded in the 80s and now into the 90s. So you had the Reagan-Bush administration cut back on housing, those kinds of things, programs that took care of people who needed the care, and all of a sudden we have this problem. There must be some link in our minds between Reagan-Bush and the problems we're talking about today. In terms of the, what's happening in the states, it's happening not just in Michigan, Illinois, it's happening across the country. When you have a shrinking economic pie, we all become scorpions in a bottle, and we go after each other, fighting each other for what's left of that pie. The last analysis, to go back to the same thing, if you want to have a liberal society where people have opportunity and caring for each other, only one way to do it, expand the economic pie. Comes back to the last analysis to the same thing. You have to have jobs, grow the economy, then you have the revenues. You don't get yourself in the dilemma that these states find themselves in. A lot of people are going to get hurt who are not at fault.
Governor Clinton.
I would provide help from the national government in the context of this for more education and training for these people and funds for cities and counties and states so that they could do some sort of community service work in transition. I think we have got to try to work these folks back into the workforce. We can't afford a massive public works program now with the deficit we have. But as we reduce the defense budget, as we get control of health care costs, as we do the things we have to do, I think we have to try to recognize that you have a whole lot of dysfunctional people out there because for 12 years we have not put our people first. We thought if we just lowered taxes on the wealthy, that everything else would take care of itself. A lot of these people could be functioning in our society if in addition to getting a check every month, they got serious education and training and efforts to place them in jobs. There are still opportunities there if you have the right kind of investment incentives and the other things that we're calling for here tonight.
Governor Brown, as you are well aware, you all have a health care plan. There are bills being proposed in Congress, many of them still in the planning stages. They're being shaped mostly by health officials, by legislators, and the insurance industry. how would you ensure that people who have long been denied access to health care, or at least quality health care, that they're involved in this process of setting up some kind of national health care plan?
By running a campaign for president to challenge the corruption in Washington that depends for $30 million every 2 years from the health industry, the insurance companies, the drug companies that are influencing Congress in a way that average Americans can't have any voice. You must challenge that stranglehold of political action committees and $1,000 donations. Now, assuming we can successfully overcome this gridlock that comes from the corrupt money, I would like to see a single-payer system. That means a universal system that you and I and the president and the homeless people are all part of. One buyer, and if you have one buyer, you can control the costs. Marty Russo has an excellent bill that goes a long way toward getting us where we want to go. And then we can cover everyone like they do in Canada, because we're going to be able to control the costs. It is not about rationing care, it's rationing greed. And as we ration greed, we're going to have enough money to take care of all the people who need health care. It's a right, not a commodity.
There are several hospitals in Illinois, and I'll direct this to you, Mr. Clinton, that have closed in recent years, increasing the burden on the facilities that have to deal with the increasing number of people who can't afford or just don't have health care. With that in mind, a lot of them have blamed their closures on the slow repayment system of Medicaid. With that in mind, how do you get around the problems that may be created by a national health care system that might include more financing by the federal government?
Well, I think you have to have a uniform payment schedule, whether it's a single-payer system that is all through tax dollars, or it's one in which employers cover their employees and the government covers everybody else. You have to have an all-payer system in which reimbursement is uniform, in which everybody has to cover at a minimum a comprehensive benefit package, including primary and preventive care, things like annual mammographies for women, 6 trips to the doctors for pregnant women, basic mental health services, and you have to have a uniform payer schedule. If you don't do that, you're going to continue to have the problems these hospitals have had. Then in addition to that, we have to recognize that a lot of people in our inner cities and in rural areas do not now have access to health care for the reasons you just said. So in any national health plan, you're going to have some money set aside by the national government to set up publicly funded clinics in cities and in rural areas.
I'm a black woman, Senator Tsongas, and I guess that's pretty clear to you. So I want to talk a little bit about an issue that I think is of concern to black Americans.
Could I make a comment on health care?
You can make a short comment. I'd like to have you answer this question as well.
Okay. The fact is, as long as George Bush is in the White House, there will be no health care system. He used the words health care in the State of the Union message just to get it in. And what he adopted was the tax credits. No one believes that's going to work. We have put forth a national health care plan based on the idea of managed competition, where everybody is covered by mandate of the federal government, but the private sector goes in and competes to bring the costs down. And it's a plan of managed competition that has been endorsed by Time Magazine, the New York Times, and Business Week, which is quite a spectrum of interests. And I believe that the managed competition health care plan is one that can pass the Congress and finally give people the relief that they need.
Sure, we're going to have to move on now to Bill Bonds from WXYZ TV in Detroit. You have the final 10 minutes, and your first question should go to Mr. Tsongas.
Thought you'd never get here, John. Thank you very much. These guys have solved all the world problems, and we haven't. Let me ask you this, gentlemen. The most important thing about a presidential campaign is to win it. We've had 28 years of Republican presidents and 12 of Democrats in the last 40 years. So the guy who's there at the end has to be electable. Governor Tsongas, you have made references to Bill Clinton's credibility, integrity, and character. If he ends up as the candidate, do you think Clinton is electable?
I will support whoever the nominee is. Let me just correct you. The most important thing is not winning. It's winning with a mandate to govern. George Bush won. 1988. Pledge of Allegiance, Willie Horton, read my lips. No mandate can govern. We have to be the alternative. We have to say to the American people, here's where we must go. Hard work, sacrifice, and vision, and then move in that direction. To win at any cost is to be no better than George Bush. In terms of the issue of electability, I believe that my economic plan, the one that was endorsed by the newspapers here in Chicago, have given me an opportunity to reach into independents and moderate Republicans. I'm going to build this economy, provide jobs, and that is something that crosses partisan lines. Democrats, working men and women, independents, moderate Republicans, that's the coalition we hope to put together in our party.
Well, if your wheels don't come off and Clinton's there at the end, could you run with Bill Clinton as his vice president?
No, I believe that Bill and I have very different economic programs. I got into this race for one purpose, to build the economy. And for me to be part of an administration that I disagreed with, it would just simply not work out, because you would ask me day one, what do you think of his middle-class tax cut? What am I going to say?
In other words, you want to be president or no thanks?
I want to lead this country in the right direction. If I cannot do that, then I think it's better to have a different team.
Does the question, Governor Brown, of Mr. Clinton's recent problems lead you to believe that he has an electability problem?
Yeah, I think he's got a big electability problem.
Well, what do you think it is?
I want to tell you what it is. It was right in the front of the Washington Post today. He is funneling money to his wife's law firm for state business. That's number one. Number two, his wife's law firm is representing clients before the state of Arkansas agencies, his appointees. And one of the key is the poultry industry, which his wife's law firm represents. And to read the local Chicago Tribune, there's 270 miles of Arkansas rivers that are polluted with fecal coliform bacteria and are unsafe for humans or fish. So it's not only corruption, it's an environmental disaster, and it's the kind of conflict of interest that is incompatible in the kind of public servant we expect from a president of the United States.
It doesn't sound like you could run as his vice president.
No, it doesn't.
Mr. Clinton, do you want to take a swing at all that stuff?
I feel sorry for Jerry Brown. I served with him as governor in the late 70s. He asked me to support him for president once.
Did you?
Of course not. You know, he reinvents himself every year or two. In 1990, he was pleading with the courts in California not to impose any limits on contributions. His law firm took $178,000 of taxpayers' money to beat a contribution limit initiative in 1990. And so I don't think you can take much of what he says seriously. Now, let me tell you this.
Well, can I just interject something? I mean, this guy just accused you of having somebody funnel legal fees to your wife and the poultry and whatever all that.
Well, his wife's law firm.
Is that true or isn't it?
Post this morning.
Is it true or isn't it true, Governor Clinton?
Wait a second, Bill. You're always trying to attack.
Brown,
you never answer the question.
Mr. Brown, let him answer.
Let me tell you something, Jerry. I don't care what you say about me. I knew when Pat Caddell told me what you were going to say, that you were going to reinvent yourself and you were going to be somebody else's mouthpiece, you would say anything. But you ought to be ashamed of yourself for jumping on my wife. You're not worth being on the same platform
I'll tell
as my
you something,
wife.
Mr. Clinton.
Now,
Don't try to escape it. Ralph Nader called me this afternoon. He read me the article from the Washington Post.
Does that make it
I was
true?
shocked by it. I was shocked by it because I don't think someone in government should be funneling money to his wife's law firm.
Governor Clinton, you were poking your finger at him. He poked it back. It's your turn, Governor
Jerry
Clinton.
comes here with his family wealth and his $1,500 suit and makes a lying accusation about my wife.
It's in the Washington Post.
That doesn't make it true.
Are you saying they lied?
I'm saying that I never funnel any money to my wife's law firm. Never.
Well, they got $115,000 in bond business in the state of Arkansas, and you told just the other day that when people lose their jobs, you know who they are. You certainly knew people in your own administration who were giving out $115,000.
This nation is trying to elect a president. This nation is trying to elect a president.
That's
Could
right.
you carry on personally?
Well, I think this is a critical issue.
Let me
on
answer
that
this.
score.
I obviously do.
The issue is, every time I've ever run for office, because I have been a change agent, because I have worried about the problems of ordinary people, because I have given the kinds of programs that will change the lives of people. The people who run against me attack me personally. I have not attacked Jerry Brown personally. I have not attacked Paul Tsongas personally. I have not said anything about their character or their history. They have done that to me. That's what everybody I've ever run against has always done. And guess what? I win because I stand up for ordinary people and real change. And it is a crying shame that because they read the polls in the Chicago papers today, I get this kind of criticism. My wife is a fine person who has not done anything unethical. She has given tens of thousands of free dollars worth of free time to serving our state, to doing free work for the state. There's no telling what all she's done. Now, let me finish. That has nothing to do with the electability issue. In terms of my electability, I have been attacked repeatedly over years and years and years, and none of it's ever stuck with my people who are discriminating because they know that I am a change agent. The only way we can win this election is with somebody who's tough enough to stand up to the kind of garbage the Republicans throw at you, the kind of personal attacks that I've been subject to in the last few days.
Get off that dime. Can I just say that you're saying, in effect, Governor Brown, that's garbage and you know it? Is that what you're saying?
It is garbage.
Okay, let's get on to something else.
Could I get a word in edgewise here in this debate?
Fine.
The fact is that this is literature being handed out for the primaries on Tuesday that misrepresent my position. Who's handing this out? Governor Clinton. Back in Florida, before that primary, he handed out information on Israel. I'm a strong supporter of Israel. Everybody knows that. He handed out a leaflet that said I voted for aid to Syria. Aid to Syria. Obvious conclusion. I'm pro-Syrian. What he did not say was that of the 7 Jewish members of the Senate, 6 of them voted the same way I did, Ted Kennedy, Scoop Jackson. I raised that on Sunday when we had the debate with Time Magazine. He said, well, that was wrong. What about this? This is wrong. He doesn't take responsibility.
You admit you were wrong, Clinton?
That flyer, I told them it was inaccurate. It was done by our local people. But let me say this. There has been only one stomped down, false, absolutely dishonest television ad run in this campaign. Only one that had no factual basis whatever. Paul Tsongas ran that against Senator Bob Kerrey and me, accusing us of raising the deficit.
So is it fair to say that what you've all three have demonstrated in the past couple of minutes is if you really want to be president of the United States, you can't be a nice guy all the time?
No, I think you can't be a nice guy. We're fighting a guy.
That's exactly the case. That's exactly
you can't be
the
nice
case.
all the time.
Look,
you got to be fighting for something bigger than yourself, though. And when we disagree, it ought to be over issues, not attacking each other personally.
Let's talk about something bigger than all
Okay, wait.
this.
I just want to get in a 20-second rebuttal here. Look,
we'll time you.
This is not garbage. The New York Times said Clinton's joined SNL operator and Ozark real estate venture. That was last week. Wait a minute.
And it was wrong.
No, I don't think it is wrong. It's this fellow, this Madison Guarantee Company.
Your 20 seconds has taken up my 5 minutes.
All right. The Washington Post said that the state of Arkansas, which he's running, is funneling money into the law firm of his wife. I think it's improper, and I think there's financial and political
Do you know
intrigue.
unequivocally, Jerry Brown, that it's the truth?
It is the truth.
You know
May
that.
I answer that?
And I want to say one thing else.
May I answer
the
that?
other night he said he's getting all this
answer.
money from Arkansas. I'd like to know how much is coming from the people doing business with the state
May I
or are
answer
connected
that?
with that.
Yeah, go
this
ahead.
is a scandal of major proportion. We're not going to sweep it under
Well, then
the rug.
let him take a shot at that, okay?
Let me answer that. My wife's law firm is the oldest law firm in America west of the Mississippi.
Mississippi.
It did business with a housing agency of our state since the 40s. So when she went to work there, I don't think they should be willing to give up all representation of state agencies. So do you know what we decided to do? She would never take any money for doing it. And then when she became a partner, she gave up her partnership share of any income attributable to business coming from state agencies. We have given up thousands of dollars. That was the appropriate thing to do. To accuse her of ethical misconduct based on something Jerry does not know what he's talking about, and he's way off base.
May I state
Look,
the obvious?
any
May I
law
state
firm
the
that could
obvious?
get a member of the family of the chief executive would give their eye teeth for that. I'm a lawyer. I've been in a law firm. I know how this thing works. I was governor. I know you raise money.
Can we
It's
get
not
off that
right,
dime,
it's
Jerry?
not proper.
Jerry, one of you is right and one of you is wrong. We'll find out who. Believe
Okay.
me, the
That's why
campaign's
we have
not
a
over.
That's why we
Let's
have a
talk about
campaign.
something that's a little bigger than all of us, the abortion issue. The Reagan-Bush court is now set. Some say it is chiseled in the Middle Ages, but it looks like Roe v. Wade is going to be reversed. If either of you, any of you is president, and Roe v. Wade comes down, as the moral political leader of this country, are you going to tell the American women who want to have an abortion, it's against the law, you can't do it, you're going to be punished?
Absolutely none.
No.
What are you going to say?
Say each woman has to decide this matter of conscience within the sanctity of their
If
own
Roe v.
conscience.
Wade is repealed, all they're going to do is the Supreme Court will say, we're going to put that back to the states. I think we're all committed to trying to pass a
Governors-
federal law to protect that right.
Senator Tsongas?
A woman's right to choose is fundamental. It is fundamental, it's mainstream. What Reagan and Bush have done is move this country outside the mainstream. Roe versus Wade is going to be the law of the land when I'm president of the United States.
And you're going to uphold it?
I uphold it. We're going to enforce it through the Congress once and for all.
If
And
it's reversed, what are you going to do?
it's reversed, then the Congress passes the law. The Supreme Court will know to stay away.
Well, it seems to me that what you've just told the American people in the Midwest, that if you're elected president and the U.S. Supreme Court reverses Roe v. Wade, you're saying ignore the law.
No,
and
no.
ignore
What
the
I'm
highest
saying
court in
is,
the land.
let me make it clear.
What are
I'm
you saying?
saying is, you go to the Congress and they pass the law in the House and Senate, the president signs it, a woman's right to choose is enacted into law.
Okay, can we turn to one other thing before
There's
we
a
go?
federal bill now
Okay.
pending. That's what he means,
Okay.
which would codify Roe v. Wade.
I was in Tokyo when President George Bush keeled over and kissed the deck. What went through your minds at that point as American citizens?
What went through my mind,
Yeah.
It was embarrassing that the President of the United States had to go peddle auto parts with the Japanese.
Did you think about the line of succession? That's
No, I
where I'm
didn't
trying
think
to
about
go
the
on
line
this.
of succession because we didn't get it until a few hours
Did
later.
it cross your mind, Governor
What I
Clinton?
think was the real issue was our president was not going there
Okay.
on the basis of strength.
What I'm trying to
What
get
went
at
through
is,
my mind was I was really sorry. I was concerned about him. I was hoping
I
there
was
was
too.
nothing wrong with him. That's what went through my mind.
did Dan Quayle go through your mind?
Yes.
Why?
Dan, the greatest responsibility a president has is
You
to
got
pick
it.
by far the best person, the vice president.
Okay, now you
let me finish. I served with Darren Quayle. I'm not a Quayle basher. But you tell me how a responsible president goes beyond Jack Kemp and Bob Dole, Alan Simpson. You want to go to Indiana? What about Dick Lugar? That was a choice that was irresponsible. I'm not criticizing. Dan Quayle was a good senator, but there were more excellent people he could have chosen, and that gives you the essence of George Bush.
That brings me to the question. Do you
Well,
really...
gentlemen, Bill, I'm afraid that's our time.
Okay, John, it was a lot of fun.
That concludes our discussion of the issues. I'm sure the voters in both Illinois and Michigan are better informed as a result of this lively interchange. Now each candidate will have a minute and a half for a closing statement, and by prior agreement, we will begin with Mr. Brown.
This is a campaign to decide the future of this country. I don't see it as a question about me personally. It's a matter of our democracy and what our interpretation of the future is. I don't believe the enemy is 5,000 miles away or 10,000. I believe the adversary is right here, right in Chicago, right in the cities, in the rural areas of America, the injustice, the inequality, the rising despair and impoverishment among the young and the old that are relegated too often to rundown motels. I want to see a government that is fully committed to a living family wage for every American. We're rich enough, and our tradition is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for every person. I know the first job of this administration must be to protect the jobs we have. That means stop the fast-track blank check, letting Bush negotiate more jobs for Mexico, and secondly, commit ourselves to an employment program through a flat tax, through savings and investment, through a civilian conservation corps, and through a commitment to make sure that every child has the education and the health care they need. My campaign is an insurgent movement, and I want to thank all the people who've called our 800 number. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of people have now joined us. They've called that number, and I'm going to repeat it, 1-800-426-1112. This is the basis of an insurgent movement to take back what is ours, our government, by you, we the people, for the people, of the people. We don't take large contributions. We live or die on the shoulders of the American people.
Governor Clinton,
thank you.
You have a minute and 30 seconds.
For over 10 years now, our country has been going downhill. We've lost our economic leadership. Ordinary, middle-class, hardworking people are working longer hours for less money, spending less time with their children. Our country is coming apart when it ought to be coming together. Children doing bullet drills instead of fire drills in the school. Crime everywhere, problems abound. And yet our national government and our president have no strategy to make this a smart work, high-wage country, not a hard work, low-wage country. This election is not really about Republicans and Democrats. It's about whether we're going to go beyond the paralyzed, stagnant politics of the 1980s in Washington to a new policy for the 90s, one that puts people first instead of money first. For 10 years, the top 1% of Americans have gotten 60% of the wealth. I want to change that. I want to give those people incentives, but only if they invest in our country, our jobs, our goods, our services, investment in America, no more something for nothing. I want to emphasize the education and training of our children and adults. And I want to put an end to the awful divisions which have gripped this country. Instead of being worried about converting from a defense to a domestic economy and generating jobs and opportunity, we're divided by race, by gender, by income, by age, by region. I have fought as hard as I could to put all those divisions behind us. I have challenged whites and blacks in Michigan and Chicago and members of all races to come together. Let's make America compete and win again by being one again. We can do that with your help.
Senator Tsongas, you have the final word.
Thank you very much. As you know, I've been endorsed by both newspapers here in Chicago. And the reason is economics. It's called jobs. It's taking your resources and building jobs. What this contest is about is very clear. Those who would take the resources and capital of this country and use it to buy your vote, middle-class tax cut, tax credits for children, this program, that program, or those of us who want to build a future. And that means you invest in the manufacturing base of this country. Japan and Germany are overtaking us. The net result of that long term is economic decline. I got into this race when George Bush was at 91%. There was no other Democrat willing to do it, because I lived in a city and I live in a city that knew economic decline. That is what is at stake here. But more importantly, what we're talking about is our children. The Reagan-Bush administration have ignored the responsibility to the next generation. We will be the first generation in American history to leave less to our children. That is all right for George Bush. That was all right for Ronald Reagan. That is not all right for us. In terms of the environment, in terms of a healed society, so black and white and brown and yellow live together as brothers and sisters, that's what we have to pass on. But most importantly, it comes down to jobs. So working men and women can have a job, go home, provide for their families, and give their children hope for their future and the generations that follow. That's what this campaign's about, and I ask for your support on Tuesday.
That concludes our program this evening. I'd like to thank the candidates and each of our panelists, Juan Andrade, Lynn Sweet, Hugh Hill, Cheryl Corley, and Bill Bonds. We hope tonight's program will help the voters in Illinois and Michigan make an informed decision at the polls on Tuesday. Above all, we encourage each and every one of you to vote. Good night.